Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. He made fun of this black man in front of everyone, but the truth stunned him. A Monday morning like any other. The sun was streaming through the large bay windows of Thekave Solstice, casting golden streaks across the raw wood tables and exposed brick walls. The smell of freshly ground coffee hung in the air, mingling with warm pastries and toasted bread. The cafe, located in the heart of Brooklyn Heights, buzzed with well-ordered activity, animated conversations, rapid typing on laptop keyboards, shouted commands, and muffled laughter. Here, the regulars had their assigned seats, their favorite latte, and often, a pressing need to assert their status. Well-tailored suits, shiny watches, wireless headphones, a hurried AIR.IT was a place of parade as much as caffeine. Behind the counter, a team of agile baristas busied themselves. They knew the first names of loyal customers, their oat milk additions, their matcha temperature requirements. In this well-oiled ballet, the entrance of Walter Johnson detonated. The man walked through the door in gentle silence. He was about 50 years old, dark-skinned, with short, gray-streaked hair. His gait was slow but assured. His deep gaze swept the space, not out of fear or curiosity, but as if taking in the size of a place he already knew all too well. He wore a crisply ironed white shirt, beige slacks, slightly worn brown shoes, and in his left hand held a brown leather briefcase, old but elegant, worn at the edges by the years. He took a deep breath, walked over to the counter, and at that moment, "Hey!" a loud, insolent voice called out, breaking the hushed atmosphere of the cafe. All heads turned. "You came to the wrong place, Grandpa. This isn't a soup kitchen. There's a fast food restaurant 2 streets over." Laughter erupted. Some were genuine, others were embarrassed, but no one intervened. The author of this attack, Kyle Benton. Young, white, arrogant in his 30s, with hair like a star of a luxury watch commercial. He wore a fitted Italian suit and expensive loafers. Kyle was part of that generation of hip executives who confused sarcasm with charisma. He came here almost every morning, flanked by 2 colleagues who always laughed at his jokes, whether they were good or not. He treated the cafe like a stage, and each customer like an audience to be conquered or ridiculed. Walter stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't flinch, but his gaze fell on Kyle, slowly. He didn't blink, didn't frown. He studied the man the way you might study a broken part you're considering, whether to repair it or throw it away. A tense silence fell. Walter tilted his head slightly to one side. His voice, when it rose, was calm, almost gentle, but tinged with a quiet authority. "I'm here for a black coffee. Not for a judgment." He hadn't raised his voice. But his words echoed through the room like an invisible slap. The laughter died down. A waitress looked away, embarrassed. A young woman by the window slowly put her phone down, uncomfortably. But Kyle chuckled and shrugged. Walter continued on his way to the counter. "Hello, I'll have a black coffee, please. No sugar." The barista, visibly disturbed by the scene, quickly complied. Walter paid cash, thanked him politely, then walked over to a table near the bay window. He carefully set down his briefcase, sat down slowly, and raised his cup to his lips. He stared outside, at the passers-by, the yellow taxis, the morning light. But around him, the lingering stares, the hushed whispers, the smirks continued to hover like invisible specters. Not a word was spoken aloud, but the air was heavy. Walter was alone in the crowded cafe. Alone and watched. Yet, he didn't move. He didn't leave the place. He stayed, and in silence he waited. Because what no one knew yet was that the man they had just belittled would soon change their world. The next morning, a cold white light flooded the top floor of the Blue Nova Tower, an ultramodern glass and steel skyscraper that dominated the Manhattan skyline. Through the immense glass walls of the executive conference room, Central Park could be seen on one side and the metallic bustle of the Brooklyn Bridge on the other. Around the oval walnut table, varnished to perfection, sat the most powerful members of society. Blue Nova Tech CFOs, global strategy managers, innovation chiefs. All were waiting, Mont-Blanc pens in hand, their faces focused, some hiding barely contained nervousness. The rumor of the surprise buyout of the majority of the company's shares, which occurred over the weekend, had taken them all by surprise. Who was this mysterious new majority shareholder? Why now? And above all, who would take the head of the council? The glass door burst open. Kyle Benton entered, late. As always, he wore the same relaxed smile, that of a man convinced that nothing could touch him. He wore a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit, paired with an ivory silk tie. He ran a hand through his neatly slicked back hair, adjusted his Rolex, then gave a knowing look to two colleagues, whispering to them in a low voice. He's probably some old industrial baron, or one of those West Coast guys with dreads and ideals. It doesn't matter. I'll convince him in 2 weeks. Muffled laughter. But as soon as he looked up at the far end of the room, his smile evaporated. Literally. His face lost all color. There, standing as straight as a marble pillar, was a man in a carefully ironed white shirt, with a deep, impenetrable gaze. Walter Johnson. The man he had publicly humiliated the day before at calf solstice. Walter hadn't changed his outfit. He wore the same shirt, the same calm. But today, he stood there not as an ordinary customer, but as a masterful presence, an anchor point in the room. Kyle stood there, unable to move forward. His breath caught for a moment, and in the silence, everyone could feel his discomfort. The Attorney General stood up, the appointment documents in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to introduce the new chairman of the board of directors of Blue Nova Tech, Mr. Walter Johnson. He was unanimously appointed by the majority shareholders after acquiring a 52% stake in the company this weekend. A shudder passed through the room. A few eyebrows were raised. Pens were dropped. Even the most seasoned members hadn't seen this masterstroke coming. Kyle, however, swallowed hard. He sat back down quietly, his palms sweating, carefully avoiding Walter's gaze. But Walter, impassive, slowly raised his eyes and looked straight into Kyle's. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, without anger, without brilliance. But each word, slowly articulated, seemed to weigh tons. Yesterday I was a customer. Today I am your superior. A deathly silence fell over the room. Walter straightened slightly, crossed his arms in front of him, and then added, with an almost imperceptible hint of irony. What a funny irony, isn't it, Mr. Benton? The silence persisted. A long, charged silence. Almost uncomfortable. Kyle, petrified, felt every eye in the room turn toward him, waiting for a reaction, a word, an explanation. But he found none. He looked down, unable to meet that gaze. Walter then sat down at the head of the table. He opened a file, adjusted his glasses, and said in a businesslike tone. Okay. Let's get started. We have a lot to do to restore this company to the vision it deserves. And everyone understood that this was only the beginning. Born in 1972 in Atlanta, in a working-class district in the south of the city, Walter Leroy Johnson had grown up in a world where the asphalt cracked in the heat, where sirens mingled with the laughter of children playing on cracked sidewalks. There, the houses were modest, the cars old, and dreams often stifled by the weight of everyday life. His father, Raymond Johnson, was a mechanic in a small neighborhood garage. A man with rough hands and a tired back, but with a calm and principled voice. His mother, Clara Johnson, a night nurse at the municipal hospital, worked shifts without ever complaining, sometimes humming hymns to mask her exhaustion. Walter, an only child, quickly realized that nothing would be given to him. At a young age, he delivered newspapers before school, helped his father repair engines after school, and spent his weekends stocking shelves in a grocery store. But he never complained. He observed. He learned. He secretly read books he borrowed from the public library, often biographies of great inventors, Baldwin novels, or advanced mathematics textbooks. It was at the age of 17 that he decided to change his trajectory, not to escape his past, but to honor his parents' sacrifices. A physics professor, impressed by his abilities and rigor, helped him prepare his application for several universities. This is how he obtained a full scholarship to Harvard, in a world that was nothing like him, but where he made his place in silence, by the strength of his spirit. At Cambridge, Walter wasn't the loudest, nor the most popular. He was the most consistent. While some chased parties, he chased ideas. He studied systems, algorithms, markets. He became passionate about computers, then about economic models. It wasn't money that attracted him, but the ability to transform lines of code into concrete solutions for the real world. In the early 2000s, just as the internet bubble had burst, Walter created his first software company, WJ Systems, in a small studio he shared with a former classmate. While others were fleeing the sector, he saw it as a field of reconstruction. He offered simple but powerful tools for small businesses abandoned by large technology groups. Success wasn't immediate. He endured months without pay and sleepless nights. But his integrity, patience, and refusal to take the easy way out eventually paid off. Within a few years, he sold his company for millions, but instead of resting or showing off, he began to invest, quietly, methodically. He wasn't interested in flashy unicorns. He was looking for usefulness, human, sustainability. He placed money in education startups, of the water treatment companies, and later in solar energy projects in disadvantaged neighborhoods. He funded coding programs in public schools, yet never appeared in the thank you photos. Walter wasn't on any TV shows. He didn't have a Twitter account. He wasn't listed on any billionaire lists. He had chosen to be invisible in order to be freer. When the opportunity to buy a significant share of BlueNova Tech had presented itself, Walter had seen an opportunity, not revenge. The company, lost in vision and mired in toxic internal practices, nevertheless had immense potential. Its technologies could serve noble causes, ethical automation, AI for public health, tools for developing countries. So Walter bought it. Through several funds, in the shadows, he gathered more than 52% of the shares. This takeover was not spectacular. It was surgical. Calculated. Precise. But chance was less controlled. It was in the 48 hours preceding the public revelation of his appointment that Walter crossed paths with Kyle Benton at Café Solstice. The latter, unable to recognize an important man without a fancy tie or noisy entourage, had publicly humiliated him, thinking he was having fun. Walter, that day, hadn't reacted. He had remained silent. Not out of weakness. Out of self-control. Because he knew. He knew that true strength does not react to provocation. It acts at the right time. A few days later, Walter didn't summon the BlueNova management team to a high-tech conference room or a luxury hotel as some had expected. No. The invitation was sent with disconcerting sobriety: meet us Thursday at 10 a.m. at the Marcy Avenue Community Center. Casual attire. Intrigued, some executives frowned upon seeing the address, located in the heart of Brooklyn East, far from the prestigious neighborhoods where they used to circulate. Upon arrival, they discovered a modest but well-maintained building, painted in blue and white, with a large mural depicting children, books, computers, trees, and a phrase painted in large letters on the lobby wall. Success is only valuable if it is shared. Inside, peals of laughter echoed. Children followed a robotics workshop led by 2 young volunteers. A group of women knitted while discussing household financial management. Former prisoners participated in a discussion group on professional reintegration. And in a glass corner, young entrepreneurs in incubation presented their projects to mentors. The management team, suits in the locker room, stilettos replaced by sneakers, looked around, a mixture of surprise, embarrassment, and curiosity in their eyes. Then Walter came in. Not in a suit. Not with a PowerPoint speech. More in an open shirt and denim jacket, greeting volunteers, children, and elders by their first names. Here, he wasn't the boss. He was a pillar, a familiar face. He seated them in a small circular room where simple chairs were arranged in a circle, with no table, no microphone, and no hierarchy. He stood in the center. Silence fell. Then Walter spoke, his voice deep and calm, without raising his voice. What you see here is the true face of success. It's not the suits, the cars, or the skyscrapers. It's not the number of zeros in a bank account. This is what greatness is, the ability to lift others up with you. He slowly turned around, looking at them one by one. Most of you come from top schools. Me too. But I've also seen what happens when intelligence has no soul. When success has no conscience. And I refuse to be part of that lie. Then his eyes fell on Kyle Benton, sitting back, stiff and uncomfortable in his brand new sweatshirt. Walter paused. There was no hatred or arrogance in his gaze. Just a cold light. A silent lesson. And sometimes, he said calmly, to learn humility, you have to drink the same coffee as those you despise. An abrupt silence fell over the room. Children could be heard laughing in the distance. Kyle, pale, couldn't bear the stare. He swallowed, then raised his hand. Can I talk to you? In private? Walter gestured for her to follow him into a small adjacent office. Inside, Kyle stood awkwardly, hands clasped, fumbling for words like a child caught in the act. I wanted to apologize. Sincerely. What I said that day, at the cafe, it was stupid, inappropriate. I didn't know who you were. Walter raised a hand, interrupting her gently. It's not about who I am, Kyle. It's about who you choose to be. Kyle looked down. I disrespected you. And I truly regret it. I behaved like someone who has never been taught to look at others with equality. Walter walked over and put his hand on Kyle's shoulder. I don't want excuses. I want you to change. Not for me. For others. For the people you'll meet tomorrow. For those who won't be able to answer you, but deserve all your respect. Kyle nodded, his throat tight. I'll do better. Walter smiled softly. So start today. You'll join the mentoring program here. 3 afternoons a month. You'll listen, share, learn. And one day, maybe, you'll understand. That day, for the first time in his life, Kyle Benton didn't speak publicly. He listened. And he learned. And Walter, as he left the community center, didn't look back. He already knew that true transformation never begins in a skyscraper. It begins where pride crumbles. 6 months later, the offices of Blue Nova Tech no longer looked like they used to. It wasn't the furniture that had changed, nor the technology, it was the atmosphere. Meetings were no longer dominated by arrogance, but by listening. Ideas of inclusion, mentoring, and social impact were no longer relegated to window dressing, they were at the heart of decisions. Under Walter's leadership, the company had launched an ambitious program of mentoring dedicated to young African Americans from disadvantaged neighborhoods, focused on emerging technologies, cybersecurity, robotics, renewable energy. The program did not bear his name, he called it Common Horizons, refusing to have his face displayed on posters or campaigns. What mattered to him was what these young people were going to build after him. The project was funded by the Foundation Clara and Raymond, named after his parents. A way for Walter to honor them, those who had never been invited to conferences or applauded in public, but who had built it, brick by brick, through their invisible work and silent love. As for Kyle Benton, his name no longer appeared in the executive organization chart, demoted to the internal training department. He had initially seen this assignment as a punishment. But he had accepted. Not out of resignation, but because something inside him had changed that day at the community center. At first, his role was simply toe-coaching young mentors off the program. He arrived with his ironed shirt, his tablet, his notes. He talked too much. Listened too little. But week after week, he was forced to be silent and observe. It saw a 16-year-old boy, taken out of foster care, build a drone from recycled parts. He heard a young girl tell how her first computer, donated by the foundation, had changed her life. He shook hands with a former inmate turned front-end developer. And he understood, greatness doesn't assert itself. It inspires. It uplifts. It gives back. One autumn morning, Walter pushed open the door of Café Solstice. The same coffee. The same walls. But a different atmosphere. The regulars looked up. Some stood up immediately, others nodded respectfully. The barista, who had witnessed the awkward moment 6 months earlier, put down his machine and said with a smile, "Your black coffee, Mr. Johnson." "As always." Walter thanked him, put down his briefcase, and sat down in the same place by the bay window. He wasn't wearing a suit. Nor an expensive watch. Just a simple jacket, his reading glasses, and that eternal calm he was known for. But this time, the looks that fell on him were no longer full of mockery. Nor of incomprehension. They were full of respect. Silent. Sincere. Not because he was rich. Not because he had taken power. But because in a world where so many seek to shine, he had chosen to shine. Because he had proven that true greatness didn't shout. She acts. Quietly. And she stays.